Let's take it into our next step. We've identified, we know our gross linear footage. Let's start getting to actual quantities of boards. This is where you've got to have a little actual factual knowledge of how the timber and lumber industry and the millwork industry works. They cut down trees and they mill boards at mill plants, and then they ship them off. They cut them in standard lengths and sizes. You know, we talk about 2x4s, 2x6s, 2x8s, 2x10s. In our floor joist world, most all floor joists either 2x8s or 2x10s in this world. Occasionally you see some engineered joists if you're like, especially second stories, you have to make really big openings. But normally it's in the 2x that we use. All the foundational floor, the floor right on top of the foundation is almost always out of 2x. It's called dimensional lumber. So, and knowing a little bit of that, they also come in standard lengths. And the minimum size that you can buy a piece of dimensional lumber in is 8 feet. And they go up in increments of 2 feet from there at a time, all the way to 16. Now you can buy 18s, 20s, 24s, but those are generally specialty millworks and usually for just roof rafters and things like that. But as far as if you drove down to the store, you're gonna find from 8 foot to 16 foot there on the shelf for most everything. So we're gonna take each one of our components, where we broke them down earlier into the actual gross linear feet. We're gonna figure out actually how many boards I would need to buy for my header joist or my girder or whatever. We're gonna do them one at a time. Again, a little slow, but you'll need this information to work with. Remember before we had 16 linear feet of header joist. You have a couple choices, like I said, 2x8, 2x10. We're gonna go with 2x8s throughout this entire project because you're gonna need to know that when you go to look up prices. So I've got 16 linear feet, 2x8s, and it comes in sizes of 8 to 16. Now I've got to do a little calculating in my head, a little building in my head as to what's gonna be the most efficient thing to work with. Well, I'm working in the world of 8, so I'm just gonna stick with an 8. I could use a 16 and cut it in half, or I can buy 2 8-footers and have less to cut. So I'm gonna take 16 linear feet, divide it by an 8-foot board, and that's gonna give me 2 boards at 8 feet. A lot of this is gonna work out really simple because we designed the plan this way, not to be real complex. In the real world, it almost never works out perfectly to the 8-foot section. Looking at our rim joist, here's one of our first examples. I know I need 10 linear feet. I can buy 8, 10, 12, so I can buy 10-foot boards, I can buy 8-foot boards. Being as a smaller project, I generally would buy smaller lengths of wood. It's just easier to handle and tote around. 16-foot 2x8s and 2x10s can get quite heavy and quite cumbersome to work with. And so I'm going back, looking at, I've got 2 pieces. I'm going to eventually need 2 pieces that are 5 foot. If I did it out of 8 foot, I would need 2 8-footers, but then I would have 3 feet of waste. Or I can do it out of 1 10-footer and split it down the middle. And knowing that the boards, that when you buy them, are never exactly 10 feet. It's gonna be 10 feet and 3/8 of an inch, 10 feet and 5/8 of an inch, 10 feet and 3/4 of an inch. They don't true the ends perfectly. You do that on the job site. There is some lumber that you can buy that's for walls that is cut completely true, but that is the exception. Everything you buy is gonna be a rough cut, and it's gonna be a little bit of extra on it so that you true your ends to the way you want them to go. So I'm gonna take the route of splitting a 10-footer in half. 10-foot linear feet divided by 1 10-foot board equals 1 10-foot board. Girders, I need 24 linear feet. I got a choice of 8s, 12s, or 16s. I could buy 2 16s, but then I've got 8-foot wastage, or I can buy 3 8-foot boards. And the longer the board gets, the more expensive it gets per foot. An 8-foot board per foot is generally a little cheaper than a 16-foot board. And usually that's counterintuitive for volume when you're buying material. Usually the more you buy, the cheaper it is. But what you run into a lot of times, sometimes there's a sweet spot. A 10-foot board could be cheaper than an 8-foot board per linear foot. But what happens to get a 16-foot board, you gotta have so much bigger tree, it's greater in value, and it costs more for the raw material to buy larger trees than smaller trees. So a lot of our basic materials come out of trees. They try to maximize every cubic inch in a tree. So a lot of it will come out of smaller trees to get the smaller lumber, and they cost less. So there's just actually a raw cost, and some things are just per unit volume way cheaper. And in the world of lumber, we call it per board foot. And we'll talk about that on another time. Common joist, I needed 35 linear feet. Now we're in the nothing works so perfectly world. I've got choices of 8s, 10s, 12s, 16s. I'm just kind of looking at some rough math. It's easier to divide by 10 sometimes. I know these are going to be eventually cut in 5s. I'm going to go for my 10-foot boards. So I've got 35 linear feet divided by a 10-foot board. That leaves me 3.5 boards. You can't buy half a board. You have to buy a whole board. So you're going to round up, and I'm going to need 4 10-foot boards. I'm going to have a little wastage. There's going to be a place that it'll be needed somewhere. Floor seal. We're measuring a perimeter, 26 linear feet. I'm going to go back here and start again and look at my floor design. I've got 8s and I've got 5s. You know how sometimes we bought 8 foot, sometimes we bought 10 foot? Going to do the same thing here. I'm going to break this 26 into 16 and 10. I need to go under my 2 header joists. I'm going to go with 8-foot boards, and I'm going to have 2 of those. To go under my rim joist, I'm going to go with 10-foot boards. I'm going to have 1 of those. Termite Shield. Same 26 linear feet, but totally different material. This stuff comes on a roll of metal anywhere from 12 to 20 inches wide, and it comes in increments usually of 25 feet, 25, 50, 100, 150, 200 when you buy the roll of it. So yeah, I could buy a 25 and have a little piece, but then I got a whole lot of wastage that I got to drag to the next job site. It's probably going to get bent up, trash, and thrown around. To me, it's a little easier to go ahead and buy the extra roll. I'm going to still have the same amount of wastage that I got to deal with. It's just easier to cut it in long pieces instead of a splice, have 25 feet, and then cut a little 1-foot piece off of the next roll. So I'm going to get it out of a 50-foot roll, and it's 1 roll with a lot of waste. Solid blocking. Remember, we had 2 runs of 8, 16 feet. I'm thinking back to my 8s again. 8-foot board's easier to handle than 16, and it usually costs less per actual board foot because it's made out of a different part of the tree. So 16 divided by 8, I got 2 boards at 8. Subfloor, we're back to our area calculation. A little bit different. Let's shift gears. We are in square feet now. The sheathing that you buy for subfloor is a special made sheathing. It's 3/4 of an inch thick. It usually has a chemical coating on it to make it water resistant because the floors end up sitting out in the weather for a while, and there's also moisture coming up from the ground to the bottom of your floor. So we use moisture resistant boards. They come in a nominal measurement of 4 feet by 8 feet. That's 32 square feet of volume. 4 times 8 is 32. I need 40. 40 divided by 32 is 1.2 sheets of plywood. I can't buy a partial piece of wood. So I have to round up, and I'm gonna need 2 full sheets of subfloor. All right, let's get down to some actual quantities. So then I rolled up an actual list here, and I'm gonna work toward, this is what I've gotta go quote to buy. Header joist, I needed 2 at 8 feet. Rim joist, I needed 1 at 10. All the way down our list here. So floor seals, I needed 2 at 8, 1 at 10. Termite shield, solid blocking, 2 at 8. Subfloor is 2 4x8 sheets. So when I start rolling these quantities together, I need 9 2x8s that are 8 foot. I need 6 2x8s that are 10 foot. Now, because of my floor seals over here have to be treated lumber, I need 2 2x8s 8 foot long treated, 1 2x8 10 foot long treated, a roll of metal, and 2 sheets of subfloor. Now, this is what I can actually take. Go to whatever building supply house you want to. You can hand it to them, or I actually look it up online or use the app and just quote out the actual prices. Now, most of the time when you do an estimate, I'm gonna add a little wastage to it. You're almost always gonna add about 10% to it than you quote. Because when you go to buy the boards, a lot of times you're not the one, unless you're the one loading it up and picking it out yourself, you're gonna get some junk from the store. Most of the times they're just gonna throw on what's quickest and what's easiest, and you're gonna get stuff that's got knots in it. You're gonna get stuff that's bowed. You're gonna get stuff that's all crooked. And I'm not gonna be able to use that board, and I'll end up having to take it back. So a lot of times I will add a 10%, calculate the total numbers I need, and then add 10% to it. So I might add a board or 2, but being that this project is so small, I'm gonna go hand pick it. So for our purposes, we're gonna quote this thing exactly for the exact finite amount of quantity that we need.